Grüß, willkommen in einer Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 15 of my Star Trek The Original Series Timeline Analysis series of videos. In this video I'll discuss the early colonization of Alpha Centauri, specifically before FTL drive was developed by Earth. You'll probably notice, or at least those who've been watching most of my videos, that this video is out of sequence, because I thought of the topic after I'd completed the entire series of videos. And rather than redo all the videos with the correct chronological sequence, I inserted it into the first available slot, which didn't need me to go back and redo anything. So my apologies. Just in case viewers are not aware, the original series timeline is not our timeline, nor is it the Next Generation timeline, and it's certainly not the Enterprise series timeline. I'm only focusing on information contained in the original series timeline. One of the biggest gaps in the original series timeline is the United Earth Territory period, up to the formation of the Federation. While we do have some information concerning the Earth-Romulans War, prior to that it's rather sparse, but we do have some clues which allow us to create viable theories. On the topic of this video, we have almost no information concerning the early colonization of Alpha Centauri, but we do have some related clues which help us understand the general events which would have likely occurred. The first point to understand is the Federation seems to only colonize habitable planets. If you have FTL drive, then that is a logical approach, although I wonder how many truly habitable planets for humans actually exist out there. This image from Memory Alpha seems to imply this colony, that's Alpha Centauri colony, may have been an island world with few or no continents. I have no idea if this is correct, but let's go with it for now. The Alpha Centauri trinary system consists of three suns, A, B and Proxima. As I have never come across a tidally locked world in Star Trek, particularly the original series, it's likely no red dwarfs were ever colonized. So for simplicity, let's drop poor old Proxima for now. Although I must point out, Proxima is closer to Earth than the other two suns, so may well have been explored first, particularly before FTL. The final candidates are Centauri A and B, both of which orbit each other. One is a bit larger than Sol and one is a bit smaller. I personally feel Centauri B is probably the best candidate. Once you factor in the suns orbit each other, planets around Centauri A may get rather warm when they are directly between both suns. But the sun the first colony occupies, or targets first, is not important for our exercise. The trigger for the early colonization of Alpha Centauri would have likely been first contacts with the Vulcans. While this is a guess, the following sequence of events probably did occur, or could have occurred. Because the Botany Bay is launched into interstellar space, a Vulcan ship notices it, backtracks it to its origin, and makes first contact with Earth. This could have been later than 1997, but 1997 is the earliest possible date for Vulcan-Earth first contact. We know that Vulcan traders are common, so the first contact may have been a Vulcan trader. In this scenario, the Vulcans are using impulse drive. After the shock of first contact, and particularly after having two world wars, Earth would have had two major objectives. The first would be to develop FTL drive, and the second would be to get to other systems to find out what threats may exist and to create a buffer zone between Earth and any identified threats. It's unlikely the Vulcans would simply give technology to the humans, so Earth needed to develop it itself, that is FTL drive. Knowing the technology exists would have been a powerful advantage which would have sped up this process. As for the colonization effort or priority, Earth would have been uncertain when they could develop FTL, so would have undertaken a sublight program to get into space, interstellar space. They may well have sent probes to Alpha Centauri before 2000, but even at 0.1 speed of light, it would take 40 plus years to get to Alpha Centauri, so while it may have occurred, it would have had no real value. Thus, FTL drive was the main gate, as well as the development of more powerful and faster sublight technologies in the interim. We know that Khan created the first sleeper ships, or at least interstellar sleeper ships, and must have achieved significant speeds in order for the episode Space Seed to play out as it did. So this would have been the template of sublight sleeper ships. However, before we get to the topic of sleeper ship, it must be important to note that before any colonists in sleeper ships were sent to Alpha Centauri, a probe needed to get there first to check for habitable planets. This gives us our major or first major problem. Do we have enough time to do this before FTL is developed for colony travel and makes the whole sleeper thing out of obsolete, so to speak? In the end, or we do know, FTL drive of a sort was developed and operational by 2002, only 5 years after first contact, which I must admit is a rather impressive feat. We know Earth sent a probe called Nomad out in early 2000s, the chart says 2002, to search for new life forms or potential threats. The diagram does say 2002, if you want to look at it. It was damaged, the probe, and eventually merged with a powerful alien probe to come back again. As it was heading towards Earth, possibly, it was coming from the far side of the Malurian race, which presumably was an alien race beyond Federation space. Unless it was randomly moving around, it must have travelled an immense distance. I suspect it did travel an immense distance, but once damaged, floated around for a great period of time before merging and starting to destroy life on its way back to Earth. This may have occurred recently, otherwise we would have heard of great swaths of the galaxy sterilised. The point is that Nomad must have had FTL drive, which means it must have used it may have used some unusual form of FTL drive, but it was FTL. This FTL drive may not have been suitable for manned ships, but was certainly suitable as a probe. I also suspect Nomad was the first FTL probe sent out by Earth. Again, perhaps it was an early form of impulse drive or something which could not be used for manned craft. Maybe it was a true warp drive, which, when you really think about it, a Alcuburian warp drive is basically, a area of immense distortion and destruction travelling through space. So wouldn't have been a very healthy thing. Maybe this was an early version of that. I suspect the Federation warp drive uses some different sort of technology, which we'll discuss later in the series. Regardless, the primary power system used in the probe was called AN57, and the drive was called Magnet-Oniododynamia Vernier Pulse 16K3. The diagram, in this case, also has a date of 2002, and this diagram is based on the original diagram shown in the episode. One interesting thought is that Earth probably sent a number of these FTL probes out as soon as they were available in order to determine if there was any threats to Earth close by. Nomad may have been the first probe, which had either issues or was damaged somehow, so we'll put that to one side. If this theory is correct, Earth could have sent a huge number of probes out to explore all the systems close to Earth, which could have had an interesting side effect, that is, listing all the possible planets that Earth could colonize, that is, habitable planets. However, that's a side issue. Back to the development of the first FTL drive. We can be certain this type of FTL drive was not suitable for human-crewed spacecraft because in 2009, Earth was still using sublight drives to explore the solar system. We know the US completed the Earth-Saturn probe using a DY-300 or perhaps DY-400 ship. That was never actually mentioned, but it was probably not a DY-100 and certainly not DY-500. This occurred in 2009. Both these spacecraft were sublight. Well, D100, anything before DY500 was sublight. Thus, we know the first FTL spacecraft, the DY500, was not ready until 2018. It's possible this first spacecraft, or the first spacecraft with FTL drive, was not actually a DY500 and it was instead a prototype craft, which is probably more likely. But we can assume the DY500 followed the prototype craft fairly soon, and it was the first possible colony ship. Because Marla, in the episode Sleeper Ship, or Space Seed, stated sleeper ships were no longer used after 2018, I suspect 2018 was the year the first FTL colony ship may have been ready, or at least that was the first year when Earth was certain FTL was coming along and there was no point sending out any more sleeper ships. Once Earth had a FTL probe, Earth could have sent it out to the 3 habitable systems of Alpha Centauri in 2003, if not earlier. This could have taken 6 months, maybe a maximum of 12 months. Once the probes had identified a habitable planet, after studying the planets for maybe 6 to 12 months max, they would have travelled back to Earth with this information. This information would allow Earth to send the sleeper ships out, perhaps by 2005. The sleeper ships could have even been prepared, because once FTL was ready, they knew though that the operation was a go situation, and they could have started preparing, getting everything ready. But prior to identifying a habitable planet, there was no point sending a sleeper ship out, simply because if you got there and there was nowhere to live, you had to come back to Earth, which would have been a bummer. Now, let's look at the sleeper ships themselves. Did they exist? How many were there? And how many were sent out? The first question is easy to answer. We know Earth had sleeper ships and did send them out somewhere. Marla identified the Botany Bay was a sleeper ship, which she states was required prior to 2018 when FTL was developed. I assume she means FTL was developed for ships which could carry people, as we know probes were FTL capable as early as 2002. The only reason why sleeper ships were required was for interstellar travel, although I must admit it's possible they may have been used for long-range interplanetary missions as well. This latter theory is unlikely because we know the Botany Bay travelled significant distance at a very high speeds, which would have made sleeper ships in the solar system pointless, as well as unnecessarily dangerous. Thus, the conclusion is sleeper ships were used for the colonisation of other systems between the Vulcan first contact in 1997 and FTL spacecraft availability in 2018. My theory is the FTL probes were required for interstellar colonisation, so the sleeper ships were likely sent out after 2002, most likely 2005, as we mentioned before. The next question is a bit harder to answer, that is, how many sleeper ships were there? We can identify the first interstellar sleeper ship is the Botany Bay. It's possible prior to the eugenics war, sleeper ships were used for the exploration of the solar system, or perhaps the technology was developed even if such ships were never actually used. I suspect the atomic engines mentioned in the series would have made the use of sleeper ships in the solar system pointless, because atomic engines actually made the ships move quite fast. Because Marla talked about sleeper ships and that they were required because travel took years, indicated she was talking most likely about interstellar travel, especially after the atomic engines made interplanetary travel occur much quicker than a year. I mean, going out to Saturn in 6 months and things of that nature. I must admit, Marla only identified the Botany Bay as a sleeper ship when she beamed over to it. However, you would not be able to identify a sleeper ship from the outside, so this is understandable. It's likely no one knew about the Botany Bay, as that ship was not in any of the Enterprise records. So there must have been other sleeper ships sent out after the eugenics war and not by Khan. These latter sleeper ships were the sleeper ships that Marla saw in the pictures she mentioned in the episode. In order to try and arrive at how many sleeper ships were built and sent out, we need to understand where they were going. The first colony, and likely only interstellar colony prior to FTL, was Alpha Centauri, likely only one planet, at least initially. As a result, this was the likely target of our sleeper ships. If the sleeper ships were first sent out in 2005 at the earliest, when were sleeper ships no longer available? Or no longer needed, I should say. Marla states the sleeper ships were no longer required when FTL was developed in 2018. The atomic engines were superseded in 2018 with a drive which allowed for interstellar travel. This was likely the impulse drive, which had to allow for faster-than-light travel. It's likely the first impulse engine ship was the DY-500 spacecraft, which is why Kirk thought the Botany Bay was the DY-500 when he first saw it. Marla stated the sleeper ships were no longer used after 2018, which could mean human-suitable FTL technology was developed in 2018, and even if the DY-500 was not ready in 2018, there was no point sending out any more sleeper ships if FTL spacecraft were only around the corner. Thus, our end date is 2018, which means sleeper ships could have been sent out during a 13-year period, most likely. Earth could have sent several ships per year or only a ship each number of years. We will never know, but a good starting point is a ship per year, which means 18 ships could have been sent out before they became obsolete. If Earth was using DY-100, DY-200 or DY-400 spacecraft as sleeper ships, we can assume each could carry at least 100 colonists along with all the necessary equipment to colonize the planet. Some ships would have been faster but smaller and others larger but slower. We really have no idea. But now let's look at the speeds these ships would have needed to be travelling at. If these ships travelled at 0.1 speed of light, which is very fast, it would take 40 plus years to get to Alpha Centauri. I have assumed Cairns Botany Bay was capable of 0.5 speed of light in order to get far enough away from Earth to make the episode Space Seed work. Could have been as little as 0.25, but 0.5 is really what it needed to achieve in order to be far enough away, basically to make the episode work. This is a real stretch, as 0.5 speed of light is very fast. But if that was the speed capable to atomic engines, then it would take 8 plus years for our sleeper ships to get to Alpha Centauri. I have no idea what the speed was, and it really doesn't matter. If the sleeper ships took 40 years, then they would arrive to a fully functioning and populated colony. If it was 8 years, then they would have arrived at the same time as our FTL colony ships arrived. Whatever the answer is, the sleeper ship colonists would have been likely very disappointed. The real colonisation of Alpha Centauri would have occurred only when the DY-500 spacecraft was available. Even if its speed was 2 times the speed of light, that would have made the journey 2 years. I suspect it was a bit faster, so the journey would be, let's say, 1 year. And so we come to an end of a rather sad episode 15 of my Star Trek, the original series timeline and analyst series of videos, in this case covering the early colonisation of Alpha Centauri and the sad fate of our intrepid sleeper ship colonists. The episode scripts can be found using the URL shown. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.